Well, welcome again, everybody. Good afternoon, good morning. This is great to get out. It's great to see people, hand slap. Even got a hug from Tom Songer. You know, Tom and I commiserated earlier that it's been a difficult time not being able to get out to see people, and I think we ended our conversation on it's better to be seen than viewed, and we'll keep that going, Tom. Welcome. Again, I'm Steve Greer, Vice President of Development for the Army Enterprise. I want to thank the CBICC, Irene and Nicole and Sierra. You guys are the best. And if you ever have a chance to work with Irene, she is very passionate about what she does and represents the chamber extremely well. And she was so nervous because she just wanted this to be a perfect event. And I think we heard that time and time again through our 4 or 5 staged events to make sure this came out right. Thank you, Irene. Appreciate it. Also want to thank the Rolling Rails Lodge for hosting this. This is my first time up here. I didn't know they were here since 2017. It's funny, when I introduced myself to Sean, this is how when you get older, you lose your relevance. He said, "Oh, I remember you," and he said, "You're Katrina Greer's dad." And I remember when it used to be Katrina, I was Katrina Greer's dad. She was my daughter at one time. Now I've lost all relevance. I'm her dad. But it's good. That's a good thing to know as our kids get older and established. I want to thank our moderator and panel, Peter and Greg and Andy and Carl and Tim. We all here? All right, good. Also, I have a few guests here. Guests who are interested in financing solar and bringing their clients to solar projects, and also some landowners. Got Alan Larson and his nephew Andrew, Bob Hoffer, who actually starts as not only looking to do projects on this property, but also has been identified as an originating project. And finally, I'd like to, and John Rogers from PNC. Thank you, John, for attending. I'd also like to thank you all for coming here. It's an important time as we're looking into the renewables as an energy source. Again, I've been in the energy and solid waste and environmental consulting business for close to 40 years now. And you know, I started on the gas side, where I used to drill wells, and was a mud engineer, drilling fluids engineer for a couple of years. I worked on in Texas to Louisiana to West Virginia, Ohio, made my way back up to Pennsylvania, where I was drilling some wildcat wells, and actually it was so frustrating because we just couldn't get the gas out of that formation called the Marcellus, which is just near 30 years ago. Look, now that it's come around again, and our group is back in the energy business. You know, we've worked in natural gas, we've worked in coal, and we've worked with renewable, which is our fastest growing practice area. I'm local. I'm a Pittsburgh boy, but I've been up here for about 35 years now. And it's one thing, you know, I talked about my family and being involved in the community is very, very important to myself and also to the art group. We have a few of my colleagues from the Arm family are present here as well. We have Wendy Pelkey, who's the director of Vice President of Natural Gas. Michael Race, he's a PE, works in all different disciplines. Tim Williams, who's actually a new hire. He's been hired as a growth manager for a few of our practice areas. Tim Mills will be on the panel here. Tim heads up our renewable energy practice. Charlie Berger, Charlie's a PG, works again on a variety of our practice areas. and Nicole Strike and Brian Barr. Nicole's a director of marketing, and Brian is an intern. He does everything that Nicole tells him to do, and quickly. And then who do I miss? Chad Everett. Chad is our business development director for one of our groups of our family, Entertech. It's Arm Entertech, and we'll discuss that a little bit later. This, I don't have a little bit about the Arm Group. We're a science and engineering firm. We have other companies. We've grown over the last 10 years quite rapidly. Now there are other companies included are Entertech, GSET, Camco, and AEC. We'll go through this quickly. This is a little timeline of our history. The significant dates are we were founded in '98. We opened up the State College office in 2007. We actually, in 2013, we developed a patent for mounting solar panels on MSE berms up in Hadley. It was in South Hadley in Massachusetts, on a landfill project. And again, you know, we continued growing, and we opened up an office in New Jersey in 2020. This gives you a little bit of an idea of our practice areas. We have 12 practice areas. We have 14 offices. We canvass Pennsylvania pretty well. But we also have offices through the Mid-Atlantic. I would say the sweet spot for our group is the Mid-Atlantic. I'm going to segue into our solar experience. This is about renewable energy. This is a map of our solar experience by discipline. You can see we do an awful lot of work for various disciplines in the Mid-Atlantic states, but we stretch across the country as well. Tim Mills will elaborate a little bit more on our renewable energy practice. Our track record for success: 15 years of renewable energy engineering and development experience. We work with an awful lot of development companies through the United States. There's a couple of sample projects. Tim will probably detail these a little bit more. And finally, I really like this slide because as I talked about our ARM family and our commitment to the community, we're not one of these companies that comes in and it's one and done. We really believe in giving back, and these are some of the companies or some of the nonprofits that we work with, and we continue to work with, and we're pretty proud of the fact that we started the Coaches versus Cancer chapter here for Penn State, and it's been going on for many years, close to 25, 30, 25, and over that time we've raised over $3 million to give back to the community. The Best Foundation is another foundation that I was a founding member of, and there that we probably raised close to $1 million there, and it all goes back to the community as well. And as you can see, these are just a few of the nonprofits that we believe in. We believe in giving back, and that's one thing that I think you can always count on for the ARM group, is that we're going to be involved in the community, and you can count on us. It's one of those neighbors, helping neighbors type of situations. And at that time, I think I'd like to introduce Peter. Peter Buck's going to serve as our moderator today. I tried to memorize the title, it just got too much. I tried to make an acronym out of it, I got sick, and it didn't go very far after that. So Peter's with the Penn State Sustainability Institute, and chair of the Intergovernmental Solar Working Group. At this time, I'd like to bring Peter. Thank you very much.
Well, it is really nice to be here. It's nice to see people I know, people who I have never met before, and I hope that we provide you with a nice lunch program here so we can talk about solar. I want to give special thanks to Steve for that introduction, for getting us kicked off. But huge props to Irene and the folks at the CBICC. If you wouldn't mind giving them a round of applause. Thank you so much. So I'm just really hopeful that everyone here can become a little bit more knowledgeable about solar today. You can understand maybe a little bit more about the market, because we're going to hear about the market from Greg Shively and some of the other folks involved. That you can understand how you, as either a homeowner, a business, an investor, a landowner, how you might become involved. And then also to understand kind of what goes into some of these projects, because at their different scales, they're really kind of different animals. So I work at Penn State. I work in our Sustainability Institute. And in 2015, the Penn State Reads book was The Boom. Has anyone here read Russell Gould's The Boom? Wow, you should all read The Boom. It's, I'm a nerd, right? I work at a university, so I'm like, have you read this one? So it is sort of great men's story on the history of the development and dominance of natural gas in the United States, and how through unconventional drilling, horizontal fracturing, horizontal drilling, hydraulic fracturing, the boom happened in the United States. So Russell Gould, he works for the Wall Street Journal. He's a sort of storied energy reporter in the US. He was giving a presentation and he said something not about natural gas that has stuck with me forever. People were saying, well, they were talking about public opinion about gas, about nuclear, about all sorts of stuff. And he said, there has been nothing with energy in the United States since the electrification of the country that people have been so excited about, like solar. People love solar. They love it all over the country, and they want the country to go solar. And I was like, but do they? So Pew, everybody's favorite, the Pew Research Foundation, has done a lot of public polling about energy. And solar is consistently the most popular form of energy in the United States by desire, everywhere, all over the country. And that is a bipartisan finding that remains very, very steady. And in recent years, as prices have come down and incremental policy changes have happened and a lot of goodwill, there's been a lot of activity. Right now in Pennsylvania, we're going to hear a lot more about this. There's a lot happening behind the scenes that may not be totally obvious. And I got a firsthand look at this by working at Penn State, where in late 2017, the university received an unsolicited bid for a solar power purchase agreement that was located in North Carolina. The farm was located in North Carolina. But the price was so shockingly low that the university thought, well, let's look into this. And so we ended up going through a process, and actually Greg Shively was involved with it. I'll introduce him in a minute. But when Penn State, one of the most risk-averse institutions that you can possibly imagine in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, decides to go solar, you know that something pretty big is happening. So I've gone on to take that, my experience with that working group, and take it into local and regional government. And right now, and I see we have some people from the Center County Housing Authority and the Council of Governments is looking at doing something like that for 15 different entities in local government to take action on climate change, to bring down prices, and also hopefully Pennsylvania economic development. So I'm a huge solar advocate. It's one of my favorite things that I get to do week in and week out with people to build a positive economic, environmental, and community future for ourselves. So I'm going to ask Greg to come up and Andy Porter to come on up and Carl Jackson here and Tim Mills to join us here at the table. And we're going to have a little bit of a conversation. And we're going to be working through sort of different scales of solar, bookended by people who work on big parts of the market. I'm going to move this out of the way. I get to have a fancy chair. I think it's pretty fun. I feel so important. All right. It'll be like James Beard, you know. Does anybody ever watch that? I'll ask him very important questions. No, I won't. So, Greg, your microphone should be good if you want to move it over a little closer to yourself. So this is Greg Chapter.
Check.
Is that on?
Is it on? Check, check.
Oh, there's a handheld on the table there for you.
Hello, check.
Testing.
Gotta push the button right there.
Hello, check. Great. So yeah.
Push the button.
So this is Greg Shadley. Greg works with PRX Energy. So Greg, will you just quickly introduce yourself and say just a few words about PRX?
Sure. Yeah, thanks. Can you hear me? You gotta hold it down. There we go. Just when the light's on. All right. Yeah, thanks for having me up here today to talk about solar. I guess I've been billed as the market guy. I know we're all market guys in our own way, but my background goes back into actual electricity trading and natural gas trading. It's kind of where I cut my teeth in the industry. And so I get kind of how the market works from the ground up. And this goes back into the early 90s when things started to deregulate. And my career evolved from trading and selling gas to retail customers and selling electricity to retail customers to realizing that I had far more knowledge than they did and I could kind of take advantage of that situation. So I flipped over to their side of the table and went into consulting to help them negotiate against the ex-me. And it's been a very rewarding career and a rewarding move. And it's allowed me to get into really what customers are experiencing and what they're trying to do. And they just don't have kind of the background to figure out how to put it together and how to find the right parties and what is a good deal structure for them. And so, while I was doing that with electricity and gas for a long time, late 20s, 2010, really started to see a lot of traction in the renewable space and people getting more and more kind of motivated by climate change and sustainability plans and particularly in universities, they're always trying to do the right thing, be leaders, on that front. And so we've been working a lot with universities and learning about what they're trying to achieve with climate action and carbon neutrality. And led me right into renewables as the obvious solution for a big portion of what they're emitting. And so I've built a consulting company that we grew. We sold it to Siemens, and I decided that I really wasn't a big company guy. I went back into small business, created PRX Energy, and recently created a consulting group in renewables focused on this market called Green Sky. And that's what brings me here today. As Peter said, I work with Penn State on their plan, their solar PPA, and we're also now looking at potentially another one and looking at all sorts of things from green hydrogen to hot water systems to just anything that you can think of that somebody has announced somewhere. We're modeling it and figuring out how does it work at the campus. So it's that kind of experience that I think is what brought me here. Made Peter think of me, and I'm happy to share some of what I know here today and certainly any follow-up.
Great, thanks so much, Greg. So next we have Andy Porter from Infinity. Just want to say a little bit about yourself and a little bit about Infinity.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. Awesome to be a part of this. Thanks, CBICC, for hosting this event. It's an honor, and I'm humbled to be up here with these awesome movers and shakers in the solar world. So I have a bit of a unique path into the solar world. I'm a State College local and currently living in Penns Valley at an off-grid solar powered homestead that my wife and I built with the help of Invinity's consulting. 5 years ago, the electric company donated me $90,000 to get power lines back to our house. And that was more than our budget to fix up this old homestead. So I asked Infinity if they would help us to put together an off-grid solar system, which they very enthusiastically did, consulted my wife and I on how to do it. And then shortly after working with us on that project, said they had an opportunity through a veterans on-the-job training program to hire me as a solar installer. Worked as a solar installer for several years and now do more of the design and sales side of the business. In that 5 years that I've been with Infinity, I've seen some incredible growth and really passionate about what an awesome company it is. Local company that gives back to the community, cares about the fellow employees. The focus of our business in the name means environment forever. So birthed out of Penn State and the consulting there, just always focused on creating more energy efficient, sustainable, healthy buildings. And that's expanded from green design and construction through significant solar projects. And then our biggest focus now is on our building energy solutions, where our commercial engineers go out and do some major cost saving energy efficiency projects with big institutions.
Great, thank you so much, Andy. All right, Carl Jackson is up next from Prospect 14.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you, CBICC, for having me. Glad we were able to actually get it in this year. Then, last year was kind of thwarted by something, I don't know if we all experienced in COVID-19. So just glad to be here. My trajectory into solar was a little bit interesting in that I owned a company in 2009, sold that company, and was looking for some way to get into something that was a little bit more, I don't want to say altruistic, but that made me feel good about getting up in the morning. And a good buddy of mine had a bunch of solar projects in New Jersey, and said, we can't get the financing for these projects. And my original job coming out of college was working for Morgan Stanley, and I had some family office clients that really wanted to get into solar or into some sort of alternative investment that had a high return. So I played matchmaker and brought several people to the table. And from there, I got on what we call the solar coaster. So at that point, was wed to this career. I worked for a ton of different companies, building and developing and financing and contracting solar projects in most markets, from as far south as Florida, as far west as California, as far north as Maine, all the way down to Texas, and was always feeling like, why is there not anything being done in Pennsylvania? Because I lived in Pennsylvania, I went to Penn State. Steve, he doesn't want me to say this, but I've known him since I was 18 years old. And so in 2017, decided to take all that knowledge and launch a company with another partner who had a similar trajectory as mine. And we decided to launch it here in Pennsylvania and to actually start developing projects in Pennsylvania, because we saw an opportunity within the grid and within the state. So long story short, we took a handful of sites, put them into PJM and started developing them. And then that aggregated up to a little over 2.5 gigawatts. And then expanded outside of Pennsylvania into Virginia, into markets like Arizona and Kentucky. And all told, over the last 3 years, we've developed a little over 5 gigawatts of solar. Those numbers may not mean a lot, but for a 3-person team, it's a significant amount of energy that we're actually putting into the ground. But what I'm most proud about is that we've done the majority of it here. In a market where 2 years ago, when I met with some people at an event that Penn State was holding, some business counterparties that we have asked, can you actually develop projects here? Can you actually get them in the ground? Can you actually finance them? And 2 of our landowners are sitting right next to Steve, and they can tell you that we are advancing those projects as we speak. So it's a great day to be in Pennsylvania. There's an energy transition that's happening here, and so I'm excited to be a part of it.
Great, thank you. And Tim Mills from Arm Group.
Thank you, guys, and thanks for having me. I'm Tim Mills. I'm from Arm Group. I'm our program manager for our renewable energy practice area. My story about getting into renewables is pretty straightforward. I Penn State grad, either go into oil and gas, or a small amount of my friends were getting into what was just booming, which was solar. I chose to go the solar route. Started out with a local company in Pennsylvania. Just wanted to stay close to family. That company was eventually acquired by a much larger company out of Toronto that was developing just worldwide. So I really cut my teeth developing everywhere outside of Pennsylvania for my first couple of years of my career up in Massachusetts, Maryland, New York, a lot of the community solar markets. But I was on the developer side, I was on the project manager side, and we were working on a portfolio with Arm Group, and Arm Group approached me. They were starting a practice area, wanted me to lead the practice area for renewable energy. Decided to join Arm Group. I had previously interned for Arm for 2 summers when I was a Penn State student. And I had known Brian Whale, our CEO, since I was a little kid. We're family friends. And so it was a great connection. I grew up in Hershey. Be able to drive 5 minutes to the office is pretty convenient. So then be able to come back up to State College is always great, especially when I did my undergrad and master's here. But kind of seen all different sides of the industry, from very small scale to what eventually grew into much larger scale development, some of the finance side, and now engineering permits approvals. So I feel like I'm one of the few people here that says I'm working actively with everyone at the table. That's one of the benefits working on the engineering side. I get to hopefully be everybody's friend and help them get their projects to be successful. But we've really seen Pennsylvania just boom the past couple of years. I remember when Carl first came into our office in 2007, there was very little solar development. This is prior to the Penn State RFP being issued. And then just like that, boom, the solar market just exploded in Pennsylvania. It's very reminiscent of the oil and gas boom. I still feel like a lot of people don't quite understand the magnitude of what's actually being developed, because a lot of it's still in the permits approvals phase until they actually get to see it physically built in the ground, see how big some of these systems are. I think a lot of people are going to be very surprised when things get developed, but yeah, happy to answer any questions about the market, just what we're seeing on the permits approvals side, engineering side, and yeah, thanks for having me.
Great, thanks so much, Tim. So I'm gonna ask a handful of questions, and we're gonna kind of mostly move down the table. But as you have questions, write them down, because we'll have a totally open Q&A in a little bit. So I'm gonna start here. If you can pass the mic down to Greg. So we've had a lot of statements about the state of the market, the solar market in Pennsylvania. So can you give us a kind of an overview, like a flyover of what that market looks like right now?
Yeah, sure. I'll attack that in 2 ways. One is kind of a ground up overview of how you access solar energy as a consumer of electricity. There are really, and there's probably a lot of different, types of folks out here, whether there's commercial businesses or institutions, or maybe just homeowner residentials. But there's 3 different ways to access solar. One is what we call kind of behind the meter type of approach, where you're installing solar behind your actual utility meter, and it's offsetting the meter. You access that through net metering rules offered by the utility. So that's more of a home residential solution. If you step up from that, You can get a little outside the meter, but it's still considered behind the meter. It's a virtual behind the meter. And so you can do projects in Pennsylvania. The rules are, at least they were, I think they still are, it's within 2 miles of your actual meter, you can put a project. So if you have shading, or if you just don't have room for a project, but you know somebody that does, or there's some land over there, or you own something over there, you can build a project within 2 miles and get that net metered through your utility bill as well. So those are 2 ways to get at solar, and there's markets that have built up around those that I know Infinity can talk more about. And then getting in more into Carl's market, move back even further away from the meter. Now you're connecting things that are much larger, and you're trying to tackle emissions or electric use that is much more substantial versus the land you have or the footprint you may be operating on. And those, I call them generally grid connected solar, or you might hear utility scale solar. It's just the very large stuff that's out there, but that has difficulty getting over to your retail load. There's a lot of market transitions and transactions that need to happen to move that over. So that's where I come in largely, is try to help folks figure out, how do you map that solar back to your actual load? And as you can imagine, solar generates when the sun's out. So you may be using electricity today, but you're not going to be getting a lot off your solar panel. You get some, but not as much as you would on a sunny day. And so there's the generation differences with your load that are an important factor in how you structure some of those transactions. And then likewise, there's the price differentials and pricing issues, right? So the price where the solar project is may not be the same price where you are. And you have to try to deal with all of those uncertainties and all of those risks. And it's an exercise in education and then in negotiation to try to get the right party to wear those risks. So that party isn't you if you don't want them, and how do you get someone else to wear them, and how is that company fitting into the next? So that's just a little bit of background on the market for how you get at solar. And all the parties up here are certainly able to help talk at a more depth on that. In terms of the scale of the market, I mean, Tim is right, and other folks up here are right. It's amazing how much you see in the PJM queue for new solar. And what I mean by PJM queue is PJM is the call it the wholesale grid, or the FERC regulated power grid, the big power lines you see cutting through the forest on the big towers that have multiple lines on them. The stuff on the poles is generally the distribution system, but the PJM grid, there you have to apply for interconnection with that grid to build any solar project, especially if it's outside the meter. Behind the meter stuff, you're dealing with utilities connecting into their grid, and it's basically all just at the meter. But the big utility scale stuff, you're connecting in with PJM. Most cases, you can connect some of those in the utility as well, but you have to apply for PJM so they can run their models and say, when you shove electricity in here, what am I going to need to do to my system to accept it and get it where it needs to go and not break anything along the way. So the queue for all of those requests has grown. Does anybody know the number? Several hundred in Pennsylvania alone. And it was probably 5 years ago, it was probably less than 100, probably far less than 100. So just, since Penn State's deal really, and since the governor closed the border to being able to, well, I'll use a term here, I'll come back and explain it if I need, but to be able to sell, use RECs outside of the state to comply with renewable goals in the state. Once he said you can't do that anymore, you can only use RECs that are in the state, the market just started to take off. So let me back up a little bit. What's a REC? I don't know if I'm going too long here, but
I'll give you 2 more minutes.
2 more minutes. What's a REC? A REC is a renewable energy credit. So when you generate something from a solar project, you get not only the kilowatt hour, you get the renewable energy credit associated with it. And that credit can be used to comply with state mandates to be a certain X amount renewable. And the state used to allow you to use RECs that were outside, so from Maryland, a project in Maryland or Virginia or Ohio, and still comply with the state standards. And they said about 3 years ago, they said no more of that. It's got to be generated from the project in the state. All of a sudden, PJMQ booms. And so everybody's applying for interconnection to PJM, and the market is really starting to take off. And as Tim said, it's still in this PJM kind of, let me see what I can do to bring this solar onto the grid process, but eventually that's going to go. And these projects are going to start getting put in the ground, and you're going to see a lot of business evolving out of that for the local communities.
Right, so the scale, the number of projects and the size of the projects in Pennsylvania have gone from, so community energy, right, had the largest solar power plant outside of Lancaster, and it was 5 megawatts, right? It was 20 some acres, isn't that right? And those have been dwarfed many, many times over by existing projects. The state government, those light source BP projects are something on the scale of all told together, like, is it 900 acres or something like that, 170, is that about right? Yeah. So, and there are multiples of those happening, right? And Carl, you work in the space of the utility scale project. So I'm gonna jump over to you. So like you're working on scales of projects that are those utility scale projects. So can you tell us a little bit about those and then how people can plug into those?
Yeah, so utility scale solar is, as Greg was highlighting, is feeding into the grid, right? So that's anything from true utility scale would be anything somewhere around 500 acres up to thousands of acres. In the state of Pennsylvania, we have multiple projects that are well above 2,000 acres. We have several that are featured. We have one featured in the outskirts of Center County. We've got a bunch of them featured in Clearfield. So there will be representative projects of that size in this general vicinity. The way that someone would consume that power, it's being dropped into the grid. And as Greg was highlighting, it really depends on what the overarching goal is of who's trying to consume that power. If it's a resident, then they're just going to get it through whatever utility that is actually participating. But if it's a corporation, what Greg is highlighting is that if they want to sign up for what's called a power purchase agreement, that's effectively a long-term power hedge or a long-term power agreement where they're going to stabilize their costs over a period of years, usually somewhere between 10 to 20 years or longer. Then they're going to need they're going to get the use of that power off of that system. But then there is an ability for, or there needs to be an ability for someone to actually consume that power, and that's where groups like Ray and others step in to help that entity actually consume that power, actually reconcile how that power is getting to them, make sure that everything matches up so that the time differential that he was highlighting, getting power at certain parts of the day, how does that actually affect your overall load? So there's some complexity there, but the long story short, to answer your question, yes, there are many projects within our portfolio and others that are, officially hitting that utility scale designation. The other thing I would say really quickly is that when we started putting projects into the PGMQ, we had, because we put a lot of them in, we had projects as low as 0.001. Actually, one of our landowners here is 001 in the queue. And the last time that we put projects into the queue, we were in the 400s. So, just in general, the amount of additional projects has grown at least between 4 to 6-fold just over the last year and a half.
And so at that scale of project too is buying off the grid, right? So around here, like the school district or the council of governments or the water authority is paying about 5 cents a kilowatt hour, right? So what are the prices looking like in this part of the state?
Everybody's a little bit different, but I would say that it runs the gamut. It really depends on where you are in the state and the point at which you're interconnecting, which hub that you're interconnecting into. But if you're in in West Hub, you're anywhere from as low as sub $30 a megawatt hour or sub 3 cents to somewhere in that 35 or 3.5 cents, somewhere in there. It could be a little bit higher depending on the way that you're consuming that power and the things that you're trying to get done. But you're in that bandwidth in there, probably anywhere from 28 or 2.8 cents up to 3.5.
So because for a long time, one of the things that we were hearing, and I mean, it was true, right, is that the price of solar was just really, really high. So that price has come way down in the last few years.
Yeah, I mean, what that is attributed to is
You're gonna
that,
get electrocuted.
yeah, I don't know. The cost of energy, the cost to deliver these projects has come down exponentially, right? So when I started in solar in 2000, the end of 2009 and 2010, the cost of a solar module was somewhere in the neighborhood of $5 to $6. The cost of a solar module today is just under 35 cents, like somewhere in between 32 to 35 cents. So that that downward curve or downward price curve has really allowed a lot more projects to get built in markets that are not as high production of sun. So and that cost and that allows us to go into markets where there aren't robust renewable energy credits or high power cost areas, right? So like if you were in Maine, you could achieve somewhere in the, even if you're doing wholesale power, you could be at 9 cents, 10 cents. Here, wholesale power is in the range that I already articulated. So, to actually get a project built in a market with low energy costs and relatively, I know that the RECs have gone up, as Greg said, but comparative to some other markets where they're in New Jersey at $200 and in DC they're $400, and here we're talking about somewhere north of $30. The cost to actually deliver the project is what is driving the ability to deploy this much energy and actually build it in this state.
Right. Economically. So that's one scale, big scale, right? 100-acre projects, bigger. I mean, we talked about 2,000-acre projects. So then, Andy, if you can pass it over to Andy, Infinity deal in this completely different scale of projects. So hospitals, right? You guys engage with hospitals, other businesses, and also the homeowners. So how do people interact with you, and what are some of the projects that you're working on?
Yeah, thanks, Peter. So Infinity is unique in that we cover the spectrum from very small off-grid solar projects with batteries to larger commercial projects that are providing power for complete businesses. A couple of examples of recent projects that we've completed, even CBICC members, Diamondback truck covers, organic climbing, and Indian Mountain Works, both in the industrial park out in Phillipsburg, offsetting 100% of their electric usage, projects that had 5-year paybacks and even qualified for some grant funding through the USDA. So Infinity is also unique in that we don't just focus on solar, we focus on the energy efficiency of buildings. So our commercial engineering team is able to turn around projects with 1-year paybacks that save hospitals and big institutions millions of dollars in energy savings or energy costs. So those operating costs that they've been saving by reducing their energy consumption, they can then put back into solar projects to reduce their energy costs even more. So that's a really unique element of Infinity's business model, is that we don't just focus on the solar. Our focus is on energy reduction first, and then solar as the icing on the cake. Residentially, we're seeing some significant cost increases in electric rates. Just in this last year, anywhere from 6% to 30% across the state from the major utilities. Infinity handles everything in-house from the initial design, the structural engineering, working with the utility and the local municipalities to get interconnection permits, building permits, and then actually have a team that's continuing to grow of solar installers that actually do the installation. And the way it'll work is just starting initially with a site visit to understand your solar potential. We recently got into flying drones to be able to build 3D models of the actual facility and understand shading on a more in-depth scale. And then after the completion of a project, set up monitoring of the system. So you're able to see what the solar panels are producing in real time, and then also set you up with a broker who will sell those renewable energy credits for you. We found that the best value for the business and the homeowner is to own their power generation as well as owning their credits. And as I mentioned previously, we've seen some significant growth just in the 5 years that I've been with Infinity. We've tripled our solar installation capacity, recently started an office out in Western PA as the market out there has grown significantly. And people like these folks up here are just continuing to increase the solar capacity. But on the small residential and business side, there's companies like Infinity that are doing quality work with integrity.
So you're involved, Infinity is one of the installers for a Pittsburgh-based solar co-op. And we have the possibility of a solar co-op coming, not a possibility, there will be a solar co-op coming to Center County. Are you able to explain solar co-ops for people who, like homeowners, businesses who may want to be involved with something like that?
Yeah, so what he's referring to is the Solar United Neighbors. And what they did was took the collective bargaining power of the cooperative to vet solar installers and then have a panel of their cooperative members choose their designated solar installer who gives an upfront dollar per watt price that they're going to install the systems for. It makes it really easy on properly sizing and pricing systems for people, but for the homeowners that are more engaged and want to be involved in the process, doing their own research and soliciting their own bids is a lot more effective way to get solar for your home, because you get to actually interview those installers, see what their proposals look like, see what is involved, because not every installer is different. There's some fly-by-night installers, chuck in a truck, we call them, and there's some other national companies that bid it at the lowest possible price, subcontract everything to the lowest possible bidder, do it as quickly as possible with no customer care. So you can really run the gamut in solar installers. And so one of the things we pride ourselves on is being a local company that cares about this community, takes good care of our employees through safety, through training, and through compensation, and really does our best to make a positive impact in our community.
That's great, thank you. And so Solar United Neighbors, I believe they're going to have a co-op set up here in Center County. I'm going to point at Pam Adams, who she'll raise her hand. This is Center Region Council of Governments Sustainability Planner, and they've been engaging on that. So if you as a homeowner, a business owner want to partake in or look at what that co-op will be, Pam is one of the people who will be able to help with that. So I'm going to go over to Tim, and then we're going to take any of your questions as well. So there's a lot around these projects that happens that is not just the panel installation. There's a lot of other work. So an ARM does a lot of that. So what should folks understand about what else kind of goes into making this market, the land use, et cetera, work?
Yeah, great question. So ARM Group is an engineering consulting company. There's a ton that goes into actually getting these projects built, commissioned, and plugged in and actually producing energy. So ARM has electrical engineering in-house. We do electrical testing. There's a lot of initial layout work we have to do. We have to do electrical design. Got to make sure you're doing the string sizing, getting the right inverters, the right panels, make sure all the voltages match up, you're connecting to the right point of interconnection. And then you have to do your final testing on projects. That's just one piece. Civil land development is something we're doing a ton of right now, especially early stage projects. So you're meeting with the local townships, the counties, going through the permits approvals, going through zoning. Pennsylvania is very unique with all its townships. There's thousands of townships throughout Pennsylvania.
2,560 local governments.
Okay, there we go. But they're all like their own little fiefdoms. They all kind of have their own rules. They might have an ordinance that says, yes, we allow solar. Maybe they're very anti-solar, or it's an educational process. So a lot of these meetings that we're going to, I'll admit, we're kind of educating them. Here's what solar is. This is how we're going to decommission the system. Is it American made? Answering any, oh my gosh, is this going to leach into the soil? Is this going to be a obstruction? View wise, I've heard it all. Is it going to electrocute my animals in the neighboring field? So we try to dispel like a lot of the rumors, a lot of the negative things about solar, explain it from an engineering perspective. But it's very diverse between the different townships, counties, just their process. But typically we get in front of the planning commission, get in front of the board of supervisors, we present initial plans, get their feedback. We take it through the land development process. We do a lot of coordination with through the state DEP level, doing MPDS permitting.
Which stands for
MPDS, National Pollution Elimination System. So stormwater, erosion sedimentation control, we got to do all these different things, check all these boxes to make sure not impacting local waterways, do subsurface investigations, make sure these steel piles are driving into the ground aren't going to hit a giant boulder and then get broken. There's a lot of customization and design that goes into these that we handle. So I've just touched on the electrical, civil, land development, but there's natural resources. We send ecologists, biologists, scientists out to sites. We look for endangered species, bog turtles, long-eared Indiana bats, all kinds of stuff can trip up your project. Maybe you have to step back from it, but wetlands, floodplains, setbacks from power lines. We have to do the surveying on these sites. We do subsurface investigations, so geotech. We test the soils, make sure it's the right type of, we test the soils for a lot of different things from the electrical point of view to also just compaction. So I feel like I get to see a lot of the things that happen behind the scenes with developing these projects. So a lot of what I'm talking about right now is what we call pre-NTP, but what it really is getting the project shovel ready to start construction. And then there's construction phase engineering services. So civil, construction design, electrical design, the testing, commissioning to make sure you can actually plug in and send the power to the grid. So a lot of that pre-NTP or getting it ready to shovel ready is happening right now in Pennsylvania for the vast majority of the projects. But I think you're going to start to see some of the first grid scale or utility scale projects being built probably this year. You probably saw the light source was a very early one that got built. It was in the queue before I think really anybody else in the state. 2014. So that was way ahead of the curve. Most of the projects Carl has been working on started going in like 2017, and then a bunch have gone in like 2019, 2020, and now into 2021. To the point where now PJM, the regional grid operator, which stretches across 13 states, is so backed up with projects, they got a FERC waiver to delay all their projects by 6 months. So they're very short staffed and there's just hundreds of gigawatts going into the queue. But ARM really is just helping developers like Carl. We work with Infinity, we work with Greg, getting these projects either shovel ready or we take it the whole way through and assist on the construction side as well. Yeah, we've seen it all permitting level.
So the last time, maybe Greg was when you and I were talking at when we did something a year and a half or so ago, that we were talking about what was in the queue at that time. It was like the beginning of, I think it was the beginning of 2020 or late in 2019, that had everything in the queue been built. is a year and a half ago, that it would have been generating almost 5% of Pennsylvania's electricity. It was something on that order. If it was everything, we know not everything gets built. Do you have an estimate for, like, do any of you know if everything were built right now that's been proposed, how much electricity that would actually be? Or is this like a stump, like, gotcha question?
It changes constantly.
Yeah.
I've heard it change multiple times. I mean, Carl, you probably know just Pennsylvania, what's in the PJQ. I know we talked a couple months ago, it's like 35 to 40 gigawatts just of solar in Pennsylvania, but in PJM, we're talking about 13 states, so it's in the hundreds.
How many homes is, or so, is 35 gigawatts of electricity?
Question.
This is the math problem part of the day. We'll just ask Google.
Yeah.
Just ask Google.
Like, I'll have to think about that.
Like tens of thousands.
That's powering many, many cities.
Yeah,
We're-
cities.
Yeah, giant city, like millions of people's homes.
Yeah.
That's, trying to think, what's the rough estimation per megawatt?
I should not have answered this question. There would be IDing of
It's-
different-
Don't quote me on this, but it's somewhere around like, I think it's somewhere between like 100 to 200 homes per megawatt. That it's offsetting some of the power. It varies on the facility depending on their electricity load, but it's an incredible amount of power. A lot of these projects are gonna fall out of the queue just because of upgrade cost or capacity on the lines, or they're competing with the natural gas plant further down the network, but it's millions of people's homes.